All right, welcome to the inaugural episode of Art is Trauma. Prepare for trauma. Uh, this, yeah, I'm Ray Schramm, and I got a PhD in math. And here's my co-host, Chris Newman, who's you got a PhD in music now, right? In composition.
Yeah, I passed. I mean, I could test them and start over and see if they'll still sign off, but on my edits. But yeah, I passed. I have a PhD now.
So naturally, that makes us extremely well qualified to talk about literature. But all right, so silly jokes aside, let's actually get into this. One thing is the reason why I actually chose these two stories for our first discussion is because we have this idea of like art is trauma, that art is something that breaks you out of the regular habit of human existence, that makes you really feel in an unguarded, naked way. And that's what I feel like both of these stories really shows. Whether that be Ionych with his spiritual death, um, or with Lady with the Little Dog with Gorov's spiritual awakening. Not a pleasant awakening, but it's an awakening. So anyway, so let's start with Ionych. What are your? I guess I'll just say a little summary for people who haven't read. It's basically
Yeah,
about
go for it.
a young man, young doctor goes to a small town. He's told, we got a rich, cultured life here. We're not so provincial. Why don't you go to the Turkins? And he meets the Turkins, and they're rather tedious people, but very pleasant. He falls in love with the daughter. The daughter basically just toys him around for a bit. Goes off to music school, and he's rather hurt, but moves on with his life. Becomes rather successful. They have a little back and forth later, and he's basically indifferent. And then he becomes basically a fat, tedious ogre of a human being by the end. And it's a fascinating story of just spiritual death. So, what were your impressions there,
Well,
Chris?
I think one thing that Chekhov does in all the stories that I read is that the gravity of an event, like how meaningful something is in a character's life, is often not quantifiable at the time. The character knows often that they're going through something. But what's beautiful about Ionych is we only know how devastating it was in the fact that he never fell in love again. He completely died. But if that wasn't there, it would have been almost an episode in the life of a countryman or something.
Yeah. There's a certain that is one wonderful thing with Chekhov is it's the tr- it's the tragedy of what doesn't happen. If you just cut out this episode of okay, you fall in love with a girl, or she treats you like a little pet, and then throws you away. It's like okay, whatever. But then you see like yeah, but no, he just dies as a human being thereafter. It's not grand, it's not dramatic. It's just sediment building over your soul and everything worthwhile dying out. Um,
Yeah. Do you think that he dies when she refuses him the first time or
no,
when she loves him back later?
no, he died.
Or is it even later or just gradual or is there even a moment
It's
for
just
you?
there's no moment. Um,
Hmm.
Chekhov is not a believer in moments. Um, it's he starts. I mean, like to me, sort of as sort of one of the finest representations of it. Let me pull it out here of just what it's like is after all of that happens and he's just dealing with like his reactions to people in the town. It says start Sev. He's called Yonich by the end, but they call him Start Sev at the beginning. Visited many different houses and met many people, but he did not strike up a close friendship with anyone. The townspeople's conversations, attitude to life, even their appearance irritated him. Gradually, experience had taught him that as long as one had played cards or enjoyed a meal with any resident of the town, then that person would be inoffensive, good natured, and even quite intelligent. But the moment one started a conversation about something that was inedible, such as politics or science, then the person would either be stumped or give vent to such absurd and vicious ideas that one could give it up as a bad job and makes one's exit. And here's one of those things, he expresses various views at times, and just he's so excited about the future and progress. And he says that, one day it'd be able to dispense with passports or the death penalty. And they would greet him with distrustful sidelong glances and ask, in that case, anyone could cut the throat of anyone he wanted to the street, couldn't he? Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more perfect than that. And one thing I have to mention that's so beautiful about that,
Yeah.
that to make you feel optimistic is, hey, in Europe they did abolish the death penalty, and you don't need a passport for most of it. There has been that progress.
Well, Chekhov. It's so funny because some people call him like a non-political writer, and you're like, well, that doesn't really make any sense in a very funny way because politics always means something in every one of his stories. So it's not that he's not a political writer, it's that politics itself always signifies a thing in every story
Well,
when a character takes up some political position.
it's just he's not concerned with the political system. He's as in
No, no,
like
you're totally
Turgenev,
right.
like Turgenev has a story, Muma or Mama, I don't know how to pronounce it, but where basically it's about the hardship of the peasants and how just utterly and stupid, and just futilely cruel the system of serfdom is. That's a political story. He's not
Right.
advocating any position, but he's saying this just is fucking hell.
Yeah.
But here it's like, okay, this is really just representative of. You could replace the politics with him saying, one day religion will be dead. One day people will not, use, silly little witchcrafts in the
Yeah.
countryside. That's perfectly fungible. And then they would say back to him, like, oh, you little atheist, I bet you eat babies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, what it does do, and it's funny that this still functions, even though it's over 100 years old, is that um, he's able to paint a picture of a character. Politics, it's what I'm saying. Politics is useful for him because it paints a picture really fast. Like with the passage you read, he didn't have to say anymore. It was almost like a lightning bolt into what was going on.
yeah, you don't need to know anything more about the people in that little town. Um,
Yeah,
although there is one more thing which I loved, which is faced, since it's a little bit lower down, he's faced with that as the reaction, so he just goes quiet in conversations, and then they complain, at the face of that, they called him a snooty Pole, although he wasn't Polish. Like, as in they give
yeah.
him a racist remark because he doesn't want to talk to them anymore. Like that's perfect. Um,
Well, they
Christ.
wouldn't call him a Pole if he was Polish. They'd call him a different nationality as a slur. That's the way the slurs work.
Yeah, but it's like it's simultaneously racist and stupid. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so there's a great passage that I wanted to kind of introduce our thing with, but that functions so well in Chekhov.
mhm.
And it's a really quick quote that is not actually ridiculously convoluted from Lacan that kind of gets the ship rolling into both Ionych and the lady with the little dog. Uh, and he writes, he's going to say the word poetry, but just take it as art. It doesn't doesn't
Yeah, it
matter.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And I just want to check. You froze again, so I just want to make sure that you
No,
can
I can
hear
hear you.
me.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? I
All
can.
right, your image is frozen.
Okay. I just if you can hear me, we can just go. Or wait, I guess you can't hear me. This is tragic.
You can always type too.
Oh,
Since I it's a there we go.
Okay, we'll just cut out that middle part right there.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna go on. So, he says the word poetry, but just it's easy to just say all literature here. Um, Poetry is the creation of a subject adopting a new order of symbolic relations to the world. That's it. So, adopting a new order of symbolic relations to the world in Jan that he symbolically dies, or he spiritually dies, would be the new relationship, and it's a negative one. Whereas in the first story, in the little girl with the big dog, oh my God, the lady with the little dog, um, the movement is in a different direction.
Yeah, 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 and it's interesting just to see the steps, like just to see like the moments that represent his disappointment with Ionich. I mean, just the way that, just when you meet the Turkins,
Yeah,
and just the way it's like, the father is just always speaking in that incredibly tedious set of, I don't know what they are, puns, like comedic language, like he's always saying baddish and, oh, like it's
and they're
repulsive.
all just their refrains. Like he never has any new ones. They're all just kind of been there for
Like
years.
even at the end of the story, while he's like tearfully saying goodbye to his daughter, going, and it's just like he still has to say, like, what he says at the beginning of the story is, like, have a good trip, if you wish, or something like that. It's just, he can't actually engage with the world authentically, um in a certain way. Like he's entombed by his own comedy.
Do you think that that's the same as the wife who writes novels but will never publish? Or
Yeah,
and they're alluded to being pretty bad novels.
yeah. It's a similar thing of, she's making these novels that are, well, they have nothing to do with life, as Chekhov says several times. They're just a sequence of cliches. Pleasant, like she's earnest about it to a degree, but of course the best line of the entire story comes in reference to her, of after Ionich is listening to her reading for the second time. He says, mediocrity is not writing bad novels. Mediocrity is writing bad novels and not being able to keep them to yourself. Um,
And you've been saying this quote for years. I mean,
yeah,
ever
yeah,
since we started talking, it's
yeah,
one of those quotes that really had a big impact on you.
yeah, because I know people that captures so well, of like, you have this little theory of yours and you don't know anything about the subject matter, and you're not willing to learn things or able to learn things about the subject matter, and I just have contempt for you. if
Nah.
if this was just a pet theory that you didn't take very seriously, it was a hobby, then okay. But when you think you're doing science and you're play acting as a scientist, it's like, you repulse me.
So
um
like a flat earther position.
it's more of a, yeah, that's like one example. It's the sort of person who, they look at a technical field, like let's say quantum mechanics or something, and they haven't actually studied it in any detail. And then they go around and think like, oh, I got the answer. I got the answer. All those bastards like Bohr and Einstein and Schrodinger, like, they're not as clever as me, because I just use some nice common sense. um it's that kind of attitude of, it's fine to have a radical point of view, but you need to do the work. You need to actually have studied. And I just hate these people who are just, they just don't realize how much work it is to actually have an opinion on these issues.
Would be, although um I think the analogy to the wife runs pretty dry pretty fast because one could argue that her reading novels in her own home is not a
Yeah,
public, that is the
that's a
authentic
little different.
amateur. That's
Yeah,
us doing a podcast, right? Like,
yeah, that's a little bit I'm being a little bit mean to her. She's a nice lady, she means well. It's just I guess if she had a little more taste, she wouldn't be um she wouldn't be so enthusiastically reading it and boring everybody every other night.
yeah,
Um
because Chekhov in the narrative was kind of alluding to like how these were not you know, they're not novels in the 19th century sense of any story of any length. They were like long novel. I mean, they were sitting there for hours, if I remember right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah,
They were like an evening length adventure to read these books.
it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Oh, for the layperson, we're lay people, so this will help too. When I said 19th century novel, all I'm saying is that our delineations between, short story versus novel depends on the country and the time period. But often a short story would be referred to as like a short novel, not a
Whatever.
yeah. I was just saying that to cue in. Whereas, when because I don't know why I was concerned with the length of these, but I think that the longer they are, the more it proves your point. Whereas the
Yeah.
shorter they are, the more it's an amateur enthusiast doing a fine gesture that is fine. I mean, I think that like the reason why the husband bothered me, I mean, the wife and husband didn't bother me. They were more like set pieces in a
Mhm.
certain sense. Like a place of comfort that in him renouncing them was a sign of his spiritual death.
Well, yeah, it's not so much renouncing them. I guess it was more just the daughter specifically. Like those two are just basically like they're pseudo intellectuals, and well, so is the daughter because she's trying to be a pianist, and you have a very good description of what she's like when she's playing music. Um, of the way she just like is just hammering away at the
For
keyboard
hours.
for
Yeah,
hours.
wasn't there a moment she had to practice for 4 hours, and I'm like, how are her fingers still attached? My God.
Yeah, but it says with regard to it, it's like that she was, Yekaterina played a long, difficult, monotonous passage that was interesting solely on account of its difficulty. As Startsev listened, he visualized large boulders rolling from atop of a high mountain, rolling and forever rolling, and he wanted the rolling to quickly stop.
Beautiful, absolutely masterful stroke of quick. That's by the way, I mean that's the thing about all short story writers that are good that really always strikes me is the speed of which an image is conveyed is is perfect in Chekhov, and that's just a technical thing that is very hard to do. When you read a bad Balzac story, he labors over, to me, an image or a character description for page after page after page, when it's not necessary. And Chekhov very rarely does anything gratuitously, at
Yeah,
least in the stories I read. I did not read the novella,
neither did I.
My Life. I didn't read My Life because I didn't do it. But
Yeah,
hopefully,
he's very. I mean, Chekhov is a bit hit and miss in my experience.
yeah,
Like the works that are great are just immortal works of literature, but the works that are not so good, I don't know. But
they're fine.
yeah, they're forgivable.
I
Um,
almost posited a third story for us to read while I was reading it, and I was heartbroken because it was incomplete, which was the
oh
story Dis
God, yeah.
Silence, which was sublime. I was like, this is one of the best stories I've ever read, and then it stopped, and I went, you can't do this to me. How
Yeah,
could you do this to me, Chekhov? Just take
you,
it, give me an ending.
you said disturbing the balance.
I really liked that one.
Yeah, that one. I mean, just that line where he says, "What was it? Um, you know, any one of the problems in his life, he could straightforwardly and simply solve if by itself, but because it was interconnected with all the other problems, even the slightest disturbing of the balance would result in all of the other problems being catastrophically destroyed. And it's just like that's great. That's great. Your life's fucked. You know,
And
that's
it's very
basically
relatable at different points in my life. Like I go, oh, I was there at one point where I was like, okay, we're going on a balance and we're going to ignore the fact that if one of these variables pulls out, it's going to be a real or imagined catastrophe. And either way,
it's just like you don't. I mean, I can just imagine that situation of like, yeah, I would like to leave my wife, but if I left my wife, that would completely sever my tottering relationship with my children. And if I tried to actually work things out with my children, then well, my I don't know, like I wouldn't have time enough at work to deal with this other thing that's hassling me, and just like it's just this web of suffering.
right.
Um,
And it's like I remember during COVID one night I was lying awake at night and I was like, well, if I die of COVID, then who's going to feed my dog? And then if no one feeds my dog, then Anna's going to be sad. And oh my God, then and it's like, well, there's like a million steps here, but the anxiety train moves and it leaves the station. And to bring it back around, you basically have to say, well, yeah, I guess we'll all die someday. You have to short circuit it somehow with some ridiculous, yes, in a million years, the earth, or millions of years, or billions of years, the earth will be dead. For me, that short circuits it. But who knows for a Chekhov character if it short circuits it.
well, it's
Um,
life is a short circuit. That's that's very
yeah,
well, no, life is either a short circuit or a broken circuit. Um, that's what you get. Ionich is a I think that's the word, like an open circuit.
mm,
It's it's like, yeah, like all this energy in life just dies out. This nice young sort of idealistic young man, who one of the reasons why he fell in love with her is because he wanted someone to talk about music and art and all of that
right,
way. He desperately wanted to have conversations with people. He actually cared and really wanted to do something meaningful with his life. I mean, he has that beautiful line of, he's talking to the country people, and he says, um, uh, and he says, um, that he just wants to work hard, that you have to do something worthwhile in your life, that it was impossible not to work hard. Yet these townspeople did nothing, absolutely nothing, and they were interested in nothing. And they considered it a personal insult, got angry, and launched in those tiresome disputations when he brought up the subject. And like
right.
that's perfect. That's perfect.
But yet he can't. I mean, he's positioning himself as outside of this. Of he's not one of these people, right? But
Well,
he
he
is.
becomes one of them. He
Yeah,
becomes
he is one of these people. Yeah, so he's
yeah.
he's
He becomes the
it,
worst one of them in a
he becomes
sense.
the worst one of them, but he does that in a sort of sense. The way he becomes so bad is through the act of thinking he's not a part of them. Like he's not meaningfully able to separate himself from this culture or do something better, and it
Well,
it pulls him into that position, I think.
yeah. I mean, there's a sense. I'm gonna differ a bit on this, at least to a degree.
Yeah,
Um, at least in another short story in a different collection, Ward Number 6, you have another doctor in the country who doesn't have anybody to talk to, and just he's basically in a private world of just lit reading books all the time. He's very lazy, doesn't invest himself. He does little, almost nothing at the hospital at a certain point, and it's interesting because his only friend at a certain point is a insane man, and that causes problems for him. But he's so the idea is that, I mean, when I compare Ionich with Ward Number 6, it's like, well, either he throws himself into his work and becomes the grossest money grubber you ever knew,
yeah,
um, the sort of guy who's has no free time, just likes to drive around in a hurry constantly. It literally is like looking for a new house to rent, to own, to rent to other people, and it'll just go uh, into places for sale. regardless of the state of the half undressed women and children running around, terrifying them, saying, is this the study? Is this the bathroom?
Ah, yeah, that was a great image too. Great scene.
Like just absolute ogre of a man. Um,
Uh-huh.
that's one way you invest yourself, or you become like the main character from War Number Six, who's just detached from life, who lives in this world of fantasy, whose best friend is a literal lunatic.
Is
Um,
there, I mean, that might be Chekhov's two mirror positions, but do you think Chekhov has a story where one just becomes part of society in a non effacing or differencing way, like just becomes a
well,
the mayor or
not in a
becomes,
small town.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think in a small town that happens. Maybe in Moscow, but we'll talk about Moscow in a bit. Um,
Yes, we will.
Um, but um, but in a small town, I mean, like the other example is like Uncle Vanya, where I can't remember the name of the doctor character in there,
Yeah.
who's idealistic, but he that guy keeps his soul, but he's exhausted. He's just burnt out, and his only I think his only hobby basically is making maps of what the forests used to like before all the peasants cut them down. Um, and he's like,
That reminds me of when I was a kid. It's a really weird thing like that happened where when I was a kid, I would build, there was a forest in front of my house, and I would build structures in the forest with my friends. And then we'd have airsoft gun fights. And I built a map. I made a map of that area. And I only got halfway done because I had a similar thought where I was like, well, I mean, I'm gonna go to college, or like we're not gonna be interested in this for very much longer. And so I just stopped. Which is
it was
a little
spiritually
lame.
cut down.
Yeah, as an adult, I'd go make that map. There's a little bit of uh not bending as you get older. Desire is something that changes, but I can't let it snap in a certain sense. Whereas in a young person, you're like, oh well, I guess that's not interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and well, yeah, but I mean, at least nowadays you don't have to end up like Ionich. You can,
No, no.
like today it's so
So
easy
would
comparatively
we say
for like
that?
minors
Oh,
or
sorry, go for it.
no, go
I
on.
cut you off. Oh,
No,
okay. I was gonna say, so would we position Yonich, the story, as a him as a tragic figure
yeah, deeply tragic.
and deeply tragic, and the heroic overcoming figure as oh my god, what's his name? And the
Hurrah.
other guy.
Yeah, and
Hurrah. Yeah.
Lady with Little Dog.
Yeah, as the as the able to overcome, not comedy, but as the lighter ending. Not lighter. Lighter is not the right word, but the character
Oh,
who
it's not
overcomes.
later at all. It's more
No,
hard.
no, sorry, I don't want to position it, but the character who overcomes certain his position.
A character who has a spiritual awakening. He
Yeah, sure.
doesn't know what the fuck to do with it, but he certainly wakes up in a big way.
I
Uh,
had so I was looking, just I was curious because both of these stories are really famous, and I was looking at just YouTube commentaries on, kind of like ours, on um Lady with a Little Dog, and one was fine, but one thing I would disagree, and I would tell them to their face that I disagree, is at the end of their commentary they rated the story out of 10, and they gave it a 7. And I was like, what are we doing here? So I'm not gonna
how?
do this.
How? Like how? How do you
And it
not
was
rate this as like scale defying? Like I mean, like
Chekhov. I don't know. I mean, and also it's like
not to be like a jerk about it, but it's like I mean, cliche. It's like no, but this isn't 11. Like this transcends what you imagine literature being. Uh,
well, they said it wasn't an objective scale. It was just how hard did it hit them personally. And I found that such a cop out though. Like, well, then why are you giving the scale? Like, if it's only just for you, like, who cares? But the main problem with doing that scale is that I think it relates to a thing we've been talking about, and maybe why we're doing the podcast, is that doing a scale on a work of literature like that, giving it a rating out of 10, de-traumatizes the document. Like it makes it a sort of quantifiable measurement instead of about the the hit of it. You're now measuring how much it got hit as if you had smoked a bowl of weed and goes, well, I'm at about a 6. um it almost effaces the
Yeah, I'm gonna.
it doesn't let the document hit you in a certain sense when you're going to give things a rating out of 10.
Well, I don't really. I can see where you're coming from there, but like I have
Yeah,
Goodreads. I'm on that app, and I always put a little star next to whatever I read, um, just to like say like, that's how much it meant to me, and it's like it's just meant to be like it's for me. Like I get that idea. Well, I mean, I like it. If like, okay, let me give it a little summary in a sense. It's not accurate. It's not precise. It's just sort of I kind of feel that way about it.
yeah.
I can see. I mean, there is like the cliche of I don't know, like one. I can't remember like the Dead Poet Society. They had that one scene where it's like, oh, let's rip out this page of the textbook where we have like a geometric scale for the quality of lit for poetry, and it's like, yeah, you can be stupid about it, but I mean, I like summarizing things that way to an
Yeah,
extent. You also
I
have
do
to
that
like
too.
you also have to say like, well, it's fine to quantify it just as long as you're saying I don't take this very seriously.
I think you're right because so I used to do that up until very recently. Occasionally if it's an obvious 5 star, I still just give it 5 stars, or an obvious 1 star. But but I stopped giving anything in between, which is kind of silly because obviously most of life is in between 5 and 1 star. But the reason why is because like I read, I don't know, Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. And this is when I finished it, and that day I went and I gave it like 4 stars or something ridiculous because it hit me. And now I look back with that 4 star rating, and it became really silly because it's like Kierkegaard 4 stars, and I I laugh at myself. So it's a certain useful thing to have because it's like, but what I couldn't quantify was how much that document would mean to me in a year after I had read it,
Yeah, yeah.
and
So
that's kind of where I stopped doing that with those because I was like, well, I was like, if Kierkegaard is a force, if you're in Trembling, a book that I can't possibly give a star rating to now. I mean, it's so disturbing and so wild. You know, I would just say other, I guess, would be now
yeah,
what I do. So that's kind of why I stopped. I still do give a 5 star occasionally or a 1 star, but that's often to help me remember not to read it again. Because I'll forget if I read that book in 10 years. And if I look back and I go, oh, I remember it did that
yeah,
thing that I
yeah. I
hated.
feel something. Like I look back at some of the stars I've given, and it's like I gave like Samuel Beckett's Malloy like 3 stars or something, and it's just like, what the fuck, man? Like Malloy, it's Malloy. This thing's a fucking masterpiece. Like
I remember that shift gradually for you because you read it and you were like, yeah, it was good. And then like within 2 months, it was like, this thing is freaking amazing.
yeah. Well,
So
that was the part
it
because
changed.
I listened to it afterwards, and it was like,
Oh.
okay, that now I'm really now I'm on his wavelength. Um,
Ah, yeah.
um,
So yeah, um, I don't have much else to. I annotated The Lady with a Little Dog and have page numbers a lot more than I did Yonich. I just had time to really dig
so
into
let me
one.
just give a quick summary of Lady with Little Dog.
Are you ready to move on to that one, or do you want to say anything else about Yonich?
Okay. Well, with Ionich, I mean, I guess,
Yeah, Yonich.
yeah. I guess we'll just. I mean, for me, um, I just when it comes to Ionich, my basic feeling is like it's really desperately important that you hold on to your values and that you don't just let go of them because the things around you disappointed you. Um, and like for me, it's like like I've had a lot of relationships where it's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm disappointed by that girl, and it wasn't nearly anything what I wanted. And it's like, yeah, but you move on. Like you don't let that define your life. And just because the people that's around you are boring doesn't, at least today, doesn't mean you have to just be complacent with that. And if you don't watch out, you just end up just becoming this satire of a human being. That's literally like, actually, when I think about what Ionich becomes, that ogre. Um,
Yeah.
it really feels like something out of a Dadaist play or work of art, or just like this. I mean, or like Ubu Roy from Alfred Jarry's play. It's like
Yeah.
it's just this fat, grotesque beast, or like what Sartre talks about of the stinkers.
The
Um,
singer.
yeah,
So it reminded me of so Chekhov is probably, in terms of percent hits versus misses, much higher than Balzac. But one thing that Balzac does that makes me very happy is he he always positions characters as slaves to some passion. Okay, and that becomes sort of dated. It's kind of sometimes a 19th century thing, but there's stories where that slavery to a passion or bondage to that passion produces monstrous results, and that's why he's great. So I was thinking of Gobseck, which I don't know if you've read.
no,
So Gobseck is the moneylender, and in the human comedy, that is the train station for the human comedy, because all the characters in all their other novels need money at some point, so they all go to Gobseck. So it's a very meta narrative book, because it's all these other characters are coming in, and that character, when they arrive, is freaking out if you've read their novel at the moment they're going to see Gobseck. It's absolutely sublime. But the thing that's great is at the end, Gobseck becomes obsessed. He becomes basically consumed by money, but the image at the end is that he can't leave his room. So the room behind his bedroom is filled with rotting food, jewels, fish, documents, all the accumulations he's achieved, but they're all rotting behind him because he can't use them. And I thought that, Ionich, the only reason Ionich would never become a slave to his passions that much is because he's such a parasite in the town that it wouldn't be proper.
well,
Like he becomes really like he can't overcome the peasantry. He doesn't realize that he's stuck with these peasants. To me,
he's in a sense he's made peace with them. Of he just there's a great in Zola's Earth. There's a doctor who literally, in his mind, he treats the peasants like they're horses or pigs. Just mentally, he just imagines them in that same exact way of like, yeah, I'm not treating someone with a brain. Like I'm just like giving birth to a baby is the same as a calf. What are you talking about? There's a difference. And I am very sympathetic with that mindset. Um, at that time, I can just see like, yeah, just I'm sorry, I don't recognize something human here. Like, they use words, but not enough. Um,
is that kind of like when we started using Chat GPT, you were like, obviously it'd be stupid to say that there's a human consciousness in Chat GPT, but you had that flip realization that a lot of discourse and language out in the real world is basically nothing better than Chat GPT
yeah,
and words
yeah,
that people use.
yeah. It's like there's a lot of people who just say words and there's not like meaning behind them. Like that's why like coding, like when you're getting a job as a programmer, like you actually have to do physical coding, because just having good grades and giving a good interview doesn't mean you know things. You have to
Right.
actually demonstrate in front of them. Oh yes, your words have standing. The representation, not just like a GBT of human language. Um, but anyway, but getting back to um, whatever we're on. Yeah,
I want to
Ionich.
finish up Yanich. I was saying that I think that Yanich can't. It's like some somehow his view of the peasantry is blocking him from having an existential moment, from
Oh no, no, I really disagree with that. It's not that they're
okay.
blocking him. It's that he just doesn't get anything out of life there. The
So it's
thing,
way broader than just the peasants. It's
yeah,
the world.
it's a small town. Like
Right.
if he was in a big city, things would be different. Um, there's problems in the big city, um, but it's just the fact that he wanted to talk to people, he wanted to fall in love, and he was disappointed. And he could have maybe escaped into a world of private fantasy like the protagonist of War Number Six, but that's about it. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like our disagreement here is kind of interesting because like why couldn't he go to a city?
yeah,
What's preventing
that's
him from
that's
going to a
that's the other
city?
thing. Like he should have, like, you could criticize him for what the fuck you doing, man. Go to St. Petersburg. Go to Moscow. Like go to somewhere where you can breathe.
Well,
Uh,
isn't the reason he can't go is because he's getting some sort of enjoyment out of his position in the town?
no, no, I just think he just like, oh, like I can make some money here, and it'd probably be difficult. I mean, it's competitive in the town. Um, so like not all, and one thing is like not all doctors can end up, you know, being in St. Petersburg. Um, so I think that's probably part of it. So yeah, I mean, so in real life, like we could criticize him if like he had another option. He could have gone somewhere where there was human beings instead of just farm animals. And it's not just the peasants; it's also just like like the society people. The people at the club, the councilmen. It's like
Yeah. My father-in-law always is like, there's this small town in Georgia, the peasants, and he often uses unironically the phrase "the peasants," and so reading Chekhov, I just keep thinking of my father-in-law's like
yeah.
it's the best beef stew you'll ever have because it was made by the peasants, and you're like, all right, and it's just funny. It's just like a because like. I think in my reading I might be over emphasizing his reliance on them for maintaining himself possibly but I think he's not happy. He's obviously uh it's almost like he's not anything. He's kind of
He's
sacrificed his
gluttonous.
yeah, he's
That's
glutton. Yeah,
that's as in he's gluttonous for, I mean that specifically, if it says greed in the text, but the feeling is just like this constant like grubbing, like just pouring it into his throat, and just like I just love that detail. He's gotten so fat he has to walk with his head held back, like because he has trouble breathing. It's
yeah.
like that's just a great image. But I mean, just the way he's so irritable. Also, like that was, I mean, just the way that people almost live in terror of him. They all know his likes and dislikes because they don't want him getting upset and like starting to hit
Right.
his cane on the ground. Who the does that?
Well, isn't his spiritual death like okay, there's obviously a tragic element, the story was sad, but there's also that's where the story gets pretty funny. I
Yeah,
mean,
it,
right? Like that's
it,
where it's pretty funny because when you
that's
sacrifice, you can become a cartoon if you sacrifice in that way, or if you die, I guess spiritually, as we're saying here, in
that's
that
what
way.
Nabokov says about Chekhov is Chekhov after Ivanov, he called his plays comedies, and even though they don't seem like it on the surface, but the reason why is because they're the sort of comedies that are just tragedies. Um, it's when you laugh so you don't have to cry. You know,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I
it's
mean,
like pointing out the absurdity of their lives, but there's no way around it. Um, and I think that's all you can do.
yeah. Okay. I think that's a good point of agreement at the tone of the ending of that story. So let's go to Lady with a Little Dog.
Okay. So just the setup here is, a guy Gurov, he goes off to Crimea, Um,
He's in Crimea.
he's in Crimea. Um,
Yeah,
and he
Ukrainians will be there soon.
yeah, and
Just kidding.
he's a rather a womanizer.
Yep.
He meets a girl there. And they have an affair together that's very delightful, but a touch forced in various ways, as we'll get into. He goes off to town, thinking back home, thinking like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm all done with that. But he finds that he's still thinking about her, still obsessed with her. And he finds her in a theater. They have a very raw sort of meeting again. They're both hopelessly in love with each other, and they don't know what the hell to do with that.
Yeah,
And
that was a very cinematic scene.
yeah, and then you see them a few months later, years later, just sitting in a hotel room together, just wondering how the hell can we make this work, because there's no way to make this work because we're both married, among other problems. So anyway, so let's get into it. Where do you want to start with Lady with Little Dog?
So I'm broken by the 20th century in literature. So like when commentators are like, so much happens and so little actually happens, I'm like, a lot happens. I don't know. I don't feel that at all. Like I just feel like it's a regular, like, yeah, things happen at a rate of normal storytelling. Like I don't get that sense of because some of the commentators that I was looking at are like, all of the motion happens when nothing's happening, and that's the part that's somewhat true, but not in a gratuitous way. I mean, we're not reading Proust here. So
Yeah,
the first thing I would say is that there's a labor involved when nothing's happening. When nothing's happening, that's when he's making his existential change. The mists of Yalta looking at her, nothing's happening, but under the surface, that's the shift.
yeah, yeah.
And at all the moments, there's nothing really happening in those moments.
Yeah. Actually, just like one of these nothing moments that really just hit home very hard is, like they start their affair, and right afterwards, she just says, um, uh, uh, she's upset because she's hasn't had an affair before. And it says, she struck a pensive, dejected pose, like the woman taken in adultery in old fashioned painting. Said, "This is wrong," she said. "You'll be the first to lose respect for me now." And one thing you get later is that he's bored by this. He doesn't take it seriously because, she's striking a pose, like in a painting. This.
He that's calling it false. There's like false mirrors where analogous points don't line up, and then there's true mirrors where their desire really does line up. That was the one I wrote. Large point of non-mirroring, where he just does not pick up on that wavelength.
Well,
I guess. Or does he pick up on it? I don't know. What do you
no,
think?
no, no. As in, he sees in a sense, like, yeah, this is just like there's a certain authenticity in her sense of like, what have I done? Like, she's actually crying, but there is a degree in which no, she's kind of playing a role of she thinks she should be guilty, so she's going to act guilty, and I just love
She's
this.
playing
What?
the role of mistress.
Yeah, yeah,
The mistress should be guilty because I'm in the structural role of being the mistress.
yeah. And but I just love what it says right after she says, "You'll lose respect for me now." It says, "On the table was a watermelon. Gurov cut himself a slice and slowly started eating it. Half an hour at least passed in silence." It's just like I know that fucking moment of just like, yeah, I don't know what to say to you. I don't know what this conflict is, and I'm just gonna eat this fucking watermelon over here, okay? I just love the complacence and just almost exhaustion with that.
Well, but that's the thing. Isn't that the thing? Like okay, so the first thing I wrote for the first 2 pages is about Dimitri's passivity, about everything. The he had been married off while still quite young, so someone else did the marrying. He was not actively involved in that decision about his life. People there's other that was the first quote that I put as evidence, but oh yeah, he felt that he had learned sufficiently from bitter experience to call about it. He that he could not have survived 2 days without his inferior breed, so he can't become a true misogynist. I love that line. It was like, it was like he's this misogynist, but it's mainly because he's being passive. He hates things, but he hates them only because they're over there, not because they're close.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm gonna say like there's a little. I'm not gonna say he's passive for having been married off. I'll just say like he just made a sort of a bad mistake, possibly. I just want to give him a little bit of credit there, and on a surface level, she seems like an appealing sort of woman. Like she's supposedly intellectual among other things, but God, his wife is just the biggest bitch. I mean, just the way, like, you know, um, she's an avid reader, follower of the latest reforms in spelling, calling her husband Demetrius instead of Dimitri. I mean, just does all that stuff. It's just so stupid. Um, but yeah,
But
but
and he was
but the
afraid
fact,
of
the
being
fact, the
home.
fact he views no, but I do want to say the fact he views women as inferior is well, it's just he's had this experience of like a lot of the women in his life are just kind of stupid bitches. Um,
I don't know. I don't think I would say that. I would say that that is the opposite of my reading of this story.
um,
So the status of women in this story is irrelevant. The Whether or not his views are correct or incorrect doesn't matter, because the character of Anna, or Anna, if we want to be Russian, is not much different than any other person he'd presumably be cheating on with. There's nothing about her that actually does. It's just that he has that existential moment. Like he,
oh yeah,
for
like
some reason, fixates on her.
yeah, for some reason they fall in love. They don't. Anna isn't really described well enough, or he's not. Chekhov isn't interested in describing her more, such that we get a real sense of why you would fall in love with this woman in particular. You gotta so like that, but I think it's in part he does that because he's just not that's not really the focus of the story. It's more just it's a story about Gurov. It's actually not really about the lady with the little dog. Um, I'm
Oh,
just
I think it's important. I think it's important that the lady with the little dog is just for him first, the general lady with the little dog, and
yeah
then is later
yeah
Anna.
yeah. Then he really
Objectivizes her.
later yeah.
Yeah. No,
Um,
but I think that there's nothing. I think you could totally describe his wife in. I mean, obviously, this character isn't given much agency, but like you could describe the wife, and she could be the hero of her own story, and we would love her. I don't think there's anything in his descriptions of her that reach a level of clarity where one should not
no,
like.
no, I'm violently disagreeing about that. As in, I mean, well, the first off, the fact I don't know, he calls him Demetrius.
Wait, no, no, hold on. I have one statement to back you up. Sorry.
Yeah,
It's when she says you're not the type to have an affair. That that statement that statement struck her as a very negative in a very
yeah,
negative way. Because
and
it struck her as totally misunderstanding her husband.
yeah, and there's the other great line about. Let's see, I'm just trying to hunt it down now. Let's see, where is it? Um, and, he's describing his reactions with different women, and I mean it's um, some of the women. Um, I'll just read the whole passage because it's just gold. He still remembered those carefree, light-hearted women in the past, so happy in their love and grateful to him for their happiness, however short-lived. And he recalled women who, like his wife, made love insincerely, with too much talk, affectedly, hysterically, with an expression that seemed to say that it was neither love nor passion, but something more significant. And he recalled 2 or 3 very beautiful, cold women, across whose faces there suddenly flashed a predatory expression. a stubborn desire to seize, to snatch from life more than it could provide. And these women were no longer young. They were capricious, irrational, domineering, and unintelligent. And when Gurov cooled towards them, their beauty aroused hatred in him, and the lace on their underclothes seemed like fish scales. That's great. That's great. That's beautiful.
Okay, it's great.
But
Ooh, thunder.
that is saying
But
something.
I don't think that says anything
I mean,
about the
that's
status
what's
of women.
horrible about his wife, as in she's the middle kind of woman who's like, she's there's a pretentiousness, there's a fakeness, she's
Maybe
trying
a
to get more
bourgeoisiness.
out of it than mere love can give, than mere passion can give. Like there's a
Yeah,
she
but he's running a limited liability company. He's not at any point going, how am I in this sexual position? There's no self-reflectivity at all
well,
in the statements at all.
I mean, it's just like you can imagine getting into his position back then, not today. But back then, it was just like, yeah, you marry a woman and you're not very good at judging women at the time, and she seems nice enough, and then you have children with her, and you soon enough kind of hate her. But you have children, and you have a respectable position at a bank, which wouldn't tolerate, you having a
Fidelity.
it's like, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, great, you're fucked. You're in this impossible situation now, and your only escape is in terms to get some kind of pleasure out of this stupid life is to have affairs.
And he can't do what and he, the guy and the father can't find his, like the father is this story, like the home life of this story.
Yeah,
Not really, that's not quite
well,
true. But
yeah,
like
no,
if
no, no,
in 10 years if he
it's
never got
close.
out,
It's actually
it's close.
close in that
Yeah.
if he was the third type of woman, the one whose undergarments looked like fish scales
The
and had that
predator.
predatory glance. Um, those dragon ladies.
See, but I still think that even at the day that positioning is positioning Gurov as the least objective judge of women in the whole, like I don't get any. To me, I read that and I find it just a funny character study moment. It doesn't, there's no referent. It's
No,
not like you could
I
actually, it's
believe
not
that.
like you should believe him.
No,
The whole point is you
I
can't, he goes from a place of non-believability to believability. So like it's much more devastating when when they recount, when the wife just says, oh, you're not, one to have affairs. That is so much more striking and telling about her than any of this puffery, to me.
I believe Gurov is a perceptive kind of man. Like he actually does see things, and when he's describing this, like it feels to me a very reasonable, impartial description of, look, some of the girls I've met were genuinely earnest and sincere, and other ones were hysterical and forced, and other ones were predatory.
Yeah,
Um, that
but
that
he's
no,
not
that
able
strikes me as that no, this isn't.
to.
We're not just inside of his head. It's like, no, like this
Uh,
is his actual experiences. He hasn't, tasted all of the various kinds of women out there, but he's certainly got a sense of certain kinds.
I don't think it strikes. Okay, well, I mean, obviously it's narrated, so there's a slight limited impartiality to it. But um, I would completely disagree. I think when my reading of this is it shows the depths of how self-absorbed he is. I don't get anything else. I don't
Like,
get like
what's your evidence that he's that self-absorbed? Like, yeah, he has affairs, but his wife is kind of unpleasant. Um,
there's no there's no flipping of perspective. His narration is always, whoa, I'm in this thing, I'm caught. There's no it's
because
never
that's
told from the
Chekhov.
perspective of
But that is
oh,
Chekhov. Like, no, like
that's a
that's
good
that's
point.
Chekhov's view of life. Is that it's like, is that, look, like of course you're stuck, and like you present this world, like when he comes back to Moscow, like that's just incredibly profound of how you have this beautiful, he has this beautiful sensitive feeling of, like, being on the mountains of looking down at
Yeah.
see, and it's like,
Well, but my evidence is the second half of the story. My evidence is look at how he talks to people completely, well, not to people, talks to Anna completely differently in the second half of the story.
yeah,
It's
as in,
it's
at that point he's
then he becomes aware of other people. So my evidence is that
other
he starts
people.
off a self-absorbed prick and gains humanity.
I would say, okay, there's a sense in which he's there's a sense in which he's spiritually not dead, but okay, where he's spiritually unliving. Um,
I was saying passive, but any word, it's not really. You're right. Passive wasn't the correct
Passive,
word, but there's
there's
probably
he's just going after idle pleasure. That's what he's
sure.
like when he's in Crimea.
Right.
Um, and that's what he's sort of like at the beginning when he's in Moscow. But then he realizes, no, I'm deep. And then he realizes, no, I can't stop thinking about this woman. This is the only thing in life that's ever mattered to me. And he wakes up. But I don't really view him as being a bad person before then. I just view him as like, yeah, he's a person who, yeah, he sadly just didn't have love before, and he got into this
Yeah.
sort of, and he's got all these bad habits, which I mean, you can say like, yeah, you really shouldn't be reading 3 newspapers a day and lying about it. Like,
Well, okay, wait. I'm not. You hit on something really important that I do want to correct. I'm not like trying to moralize this guy. Let me go back. I just like the characterization of him because that was something in some of the commentaries that drove me a little nuts. Is when it was like many of you will read this and think adultery is wrong, and I'm like, well, okay, sure, whatever. Who cares? But like, like I mean, like that's like I mean, I guess you if that's the only way you can read it. I mean, I guess you read it sort of, not really, but that's not really the for me the point of the beautiful point is that he gets out of his head.
yeah,
It's not a moral issue.
well, the beautiful, but yeah, like the beautiful part of the story is he's in this state of spiritual indifference, and then he actually falls in love. And
Yeah,
before they had both been false, like what you were saying is, he was. I mean, there's a little passage where, well, first off, she's always sort of like playing the woman fallen in adultery. um, she's
yeah,
always, moralizing and not quite in full gear with him. And he is, there was a touch of mockery. There's a certain sense of like, he's being very nice to her, but he does have the manner of a gloating male who enjoys being with a woman half his age. And,
right.
and then later, when he actually sees himself in the mirror with her in the hotel room, and he sees the fact that he's graying, and it's like that's actually a point of shame almost, of like, God, I'm this old and I finally found the person that I want to be with. He's actually dealing with it in an authentic human way instead of like,
Yeah. Can I give you a point of evidence that Steelman's your point? Okay, not really the right phrasing, but okay. So in the first half, when she's crying, he's like, okay, it's kind of authentic or whatever, but it's kind of annoying or something with the moral where she goes like, where I'm bad, I'm sinning. In the second half, he goes up to her, please stop crying. She's crying. They meet up again. He goes, please stop crying. He said, and then instead of going about how annoying it was that blah blah blah, the narration goes, now he could see quite clearly that this was no short-lived affair.
yeah,
And it was like, oh shit, that's totally different from the reaction in the first half.
yeah. The first time
Yeah,
he's literally bored. He's just like, get over it, lady. And in a sense, she should get over it because she's half inauthentic about it. But yeah, this time it's like, no, he
and,
really.
and then version he should not get over it if he chooses to, and then he chooses not to get over it, and that's a sign of the
And just, I mean, just that ending of it, it's just too much to deal with. Just the way, it says, and then they conferred for a long time, about what to do about their situation. I wondered how they could free themselves from the need to hide, to deceive, to live in different towns, to see each other only after long intervals. How could they break free from these intolerable chains? How? How? He asked, clutching his head. How? And it seemed, given a little more time, a solution would be found, and then a new, beautiful life would begin. And both of them clearly realized that the end was far, far away, and the most complicated and difficult part was only just beginning. that's
Yeah.
just, that's
Yeah, it's
just,
great.
that's just,
So,
I don't know how a human being can write
yeah.
that.
So to flip it around, that not to flip it around, to continue the line of him, um, so like there's a line of thinking in Heidegger's Being in Time where authenticity is it's like a type of silence. Like there's idle chatter of the type of like, well, probably that we're doing right now, but like, like just a lot of blah 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 blah. And there's authentic moments in that chatter, but a lot of talking in life is just idle chatter, blah 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 blah. Ordering food, yada yada yada. And there's this line, there's this sense that in the face of that, authenticity is quiet. And there's obviously a ton more there, but look at how when he becomes more in love, how many questions he asks instead of answers he asks. How? And then at the other point, when he sees her, please understand, please, 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 I beg you understand. There's a, it's almost like for him to really fall in love, it's like a loss of um idle chatter, I guess.
Yeah,
A loss of the talking that he did in the first.
yeah, I resonate with that a lot. I mean, at least the way I'm sort of reading when you say that is the idle chatter, well, the silence is you're actually open and receptive to experience. You're listening. Um,
Yeah, you're listening.
you're not pasting over a life. You're pre-made abstractions. And that's that. And like when you're saying about like, well, I'm actually asking questions. Like that's one thing when you meet someone who's like a has a dogmatic kind of mindset. It's like they have all the answers and they come up with, and even the ones they don't, they confabulate something to make up for it, while someone who's really grappling with an issue and thinking things through, they pause, they're silent, they don't have all the answers because they take the issue seriously, they're listening, they're silent. um
Do you think the ending is a question?
oh
That type? I'm sorry, I know that's a kind of cutesy move, but
um
do you find the ending is a
no,
question or is it
no,
an answer?
no, it's an answer, as
Yeah.
in life is fucking horrible.
Oh, okay.
Like that's what it's saying is like, look, I mean, well, that's too broad the way I said it. It's a very specific kind of horrible. It's the sort of horrible where I'm tortured by this situation. I can't move an inch in any direction. I can't do anything that's not going to disturb the balance. And I feel this tantalizing sense that there's some way that it's going to work out. There's some way there's going to be a solution, but there
Right.
isn't, and like that's the way it's like that's the core. That's the essence of life is irresolution, frustration, um, confusion, befuddlement. Like that's the core for Chekhov.
So
Uh,
do you think that going on that, do you think that when Chekhov is writing these things, there these things, these stories, um, that like in this story that he is almost talking to himself at the end?
um, well, I'd say, what do you mean talking to himself?
Not talking to himself. That makes it sound like a bad thing. I mean like a good thing.
Like he's trying to deal with the issue.
Resonating. Yeah, he's dealing with the
Yeah,
issue
well, that's what About
of
Love is like.
yeah.
About like did you read that story in the collection? Um, the,
Oh, no, I didn't get to that one. I'm sorry.
that one's amazing because it presents a problem and then just leaves it there. Of what do you do when you're a who's like a poor person who falls in love with, and the woman falls in love with you, and she's married, and all that you can offer her is poverty. Um, like, should she leave her comfortable life and be with you and be half starving and drudgery, or should she stay
Yeah.
in her comfortable life and not have anything meaningful? Like, what do you do in that situation? And Chekhov says, in there basically that there's no answer to this question. Don't give me your prefabricated abstractions and solutions. It's like, I want what's real here. Like, how, and like he just leaves as, and in some letter, he says it's not so important that you give an answer in a short story, but you need to have a question. Um,
Right, right. Oh, by the way, so on that exact thing where so I will read that story and get back to you. But one of the reasons formally why I bring this question up of I'm not going to say Chekhov, but I'll say the limited the narrator, limited in a certain way. The intrusions in the narration are stark at different points, and some of them are a little heavy-handed. Like I got one where he just goes, and in this permanency, in this utter indifference to the life and death of every one of us, there perhaps lies hidden a pledge of our eternal salvation, of never ceasing progress of life upon the earth, of the never ceasing march towards perfection. Kind of just like comes out there and is very, oh, this is a different voice. This is now the narration claiming a subjectivity. And at the end, they collapse. How could they break free from these intolerable chains? How he asked. So
yeah,
there's a lovely breaking in between the narration's subjectivity and his subjectivity.
yeah. I mean, Gurov is very much Chekhov on some level. They're on the same page.
I
Um,
just think he doesn't do it. He just does it in such a subtle way, right? Like just
yeah,
instead
yeah,
of
like
saying,
that's a
I'm
good.
Chekhov, he all he does is that little internal elision. And it's
Yeah,
it's
no,
lovely.
I like that tremendously. Of that's an excellent formal point that I had actually never thought about. Is it's we're learning something about life that the narrator wants to tell us, and we're learning about Gurov and the way he's seeing things, and we're enmeshed in like that, this,
Yeah, I mean,
space
it
between.
enmeshes it right there, and you can't fully collapse the two because I think that would be too over the top. But just that little at the end elision to me is the formal ending.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sort of, or it's at least sorry. There's so much going on in the story. That's one point of the formal ending. There's it's it's funny because I started annotating the story for what I'm always looking for in terms of mirrors and parallels and characterizations. And I just stopped annotating after a couple pages because the whole page is filled with arrows referring back, to different
oh yeah,
places.
yeah. I mean,
Because you're like, well, okay,
one of the things I found so perfect is just the way that he describe Gurov thinks of affairs as they see things like, yeah, like whenever you start an affair, it always seems so pleasant and unproblematic, a little adventure to go on, and then it becomes this impossible to unwind, gnarled difficulty. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens.
huh,
He's thinking
huh.
this exact thing before he goes and starts talking to Anna. And then this is literally where the story ends, exactly as he had pretended, so to speak. Um,
I also like that. Like this is such a tiny point, but like Gurog doesn't care about dogs. I mean, it doesn't. This doesn't matter at all. This is just a personal point. Like when he first meets the dog growls at her, and so he's like, "All right, I'm gonna use this dog as a sign, to get there." And then he forgets the dog's name, and we
oh,
never know the dog's name.
no, no, it's he forgets the dog. Well, it says he could have remembered if he hadn't been so nervous. You
Fair
know,
enough.
so
But we never know the dog's name. Again, this
yeah.
is this is
I
like
mean, the dog
deeply
doesn't matter.
unimportant. This is deeply unimportant. I just wanted to throw it out there.
Well, actually, just on the title though, because you bring up the dog, like I thought that was just the way it's just it. Yeah, actually, I never thought about the name. I never bothered to ask myself why exactly it's named this. Lady with the little dog, and
Instead of Anna
yeah,
or
instead of
something.
Anna or something like the Awakening or First Love or something like that.
If he named it First Love, I'd be a little. It's a little much for me.
Oh no, Turgenev has a story called First Love, which deserves the title. So
And you're right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking as a 21st century person, where if I read if I read a story called First Love, it would be like a person discovering how to beat someone or something. I don't know. It would be so a little ironic or something. But
uh,
yeah, no, you're right. You're right. If it was called
that,
First
that,
Love, it'd still be a
but
great
the
story.
reason why it's called this is because it puts you in the mindset of Gurov when he's first seeing this woman who he wants to start an affair with. It just at that moment of incipience.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's the moment, and it also serves a double function where at the end of the story, you look back and the title was not Anna, it was the girl with the little dog, and you go, oh, this all started at this point.
yeah, yeah. Um, there's let's see, and just there's another. Oh God, there was one thing that just changing just there's another little point from the story is that I just can't believe how a human being writes this sort of thing. Um, of like he's just talking with his he's walking his daughters to school, and that's on the way to see Anna at the hotel.
Yep.
Um, and he's answering little questions about it's 3 degrees above zero, but it was snowing and all that sort of stuff, and just the way he's realizing, yeah, but I'm going off to an assignation for an affair, and he says, he would the narrator says he was leading a double life. One was undisguised, plain for all to see, and known to everyone who needed to know, full of conventional truths and conventional deception, identical to the lives of his friends and acquaintances, and another which went on in secret, and by some strange, possibly fortuitous change of circumstances, everything that was important, interesting, and necessary for him, where he behaved sincerely and did not deceive himself, which was the very essence of his life, that was conducted in complete secrecy. Whereas all
Yeah.
that was false about him, the front behind which he hid in order to conceal the truth, for instance, his work at the bank, his quarrels at the club, his notion of an inferior breed, his attending anniversary celebrations with the wife, this was plain for all to see. It's like that's just the idea. Like everything valuable in your life is
Yeah.
secret, hidden, surreptitious, and everything false. Anniversary celebrations with your wife, your
Oh
contempt
yeah.
for women. Also like that, throw that in. It's like that's all anybody can see. Oh, that's old Gurov over there. Like that's just the
Yeah.
repression is just, oh God, that's beautiful.
I
Um,
wonder if Sartre had anything on this story because in existentialism it stresses so much the basic performativity of everything that you are not what you're thinking but what you're doing, right? And obviously in this case both are actions, so on a certain level whatever, but in another level, um I just wonder what Sartre would say about that paragraph you read about his bind being a private versus public bind. I just would love to see that commentary if it exists. I don't know what Sartre would say because he can't. He's a great thinker.
yeah.
He can't just. But I mean, I wonder if he would find something
No,
uh
he must.
wonderful to have.
Yeah, I feel like he must have had something great to say about it. Although,
I mean, he wrote like 40 million pages a day, so he probably said, "How could he possibly?" Right? Like he probably mentioned Chekhov at some point in there.
yeah, like there's so many. I mean, there's so many Russians that well, I don't know if so many, but at least there's a number of Russians. Like Tolstoy also is heavy on these sort of existentialist themes later in his life, or actually even in Anna Karenina. But that's like the whole of the death of Ivan Ilyich is like living a false life for the entire time that you're alive until like you actually have to deal with the fact of death. Um,
Yeah.
and like, is there? I mean, Dostoevsky, yeah, Dostoevsky kind of deals with these themes, not as directly, but he definitely deals with being possessed by ideas um, that, in a sense, you don't actually believe in a certain kind of way that are what you want to be the case. At least that's like in like the literally the possessed, deals with those sorts of themes.
I also am reminded of so there's the show. Did you ever watch Schitt's Creek?
No.
It had a good it's just a rich family loses all their money and they have to go live in this town that they bought years ago on a dare. It's a great premise, right? Yeah, it actually already is like a kind of a 19th century Dickensian premise. But then so they get to this town and the guy David
Mhm.
is like, well, I need to wear this couture thing. I need to do that. I need to do that. And then he's befriending this lady, and she goes, well, and then just totally dispels all the myths about him. And he goes, look, lady, there are certain lies that I tell myself, and my friends know those lies and will continue them on. And there's sort of a I didn't think about that with the lady with the little dog, but I thought that the people who would say that line were the family in Ionich's story, the husband and the wife. Like, look, I can see the husband going, look, I know these are really silly, stupid phrases I'm saying. There are certain lies I tell myself that need to, if my friends know, function. And some of that is fine. There's a certain lie that people tell each other about a lot of things, but there is a core lie that needs to be dispelled. Otherwise, Chekhov doesn't make sense in a certain
Well,
way.
I mean, like, I'm not gonna. The idea of living with lie in an atmosphere of lies like that, where you're deceiving yourself,
Yeah.
like that's terrible. Like that, you've failed in a sense with that. Now, in the case with with what's it with Chekhov, with Gorov and Lady with Little Dog, it's like, yeah, he has lies, and okay, he does lie to himself about some things. Like, it does say he does have self deception, and that's a problem. Um, that's because, okay, actually, I don't know what the point I'm trying to make. I'm just saying that self deception is bad. And I feel like
Yeah, sure. I would agree for
um,
not
yeah,
the activity, but mostly I'll agree.
yeah.
Self-deception when I'm playing chess at a 1400 level, thinking I'm amazing is probably not very harmful.
Well, it's well, that's well. I mean,
But that's also not an existential position very much.
this is the point that Chekhov is actually making, is just how poisonous the self deception is. And, like, like when he has that little taxonomy of women, it's like they're more poisonous in proportion to how much they're faking it. How much, it's like, are they just trying to get more out of this affection and passion than it could possibly give? Or are they these like predatory creatures, who are, I mean, like, what, I have to just look up, like, what is, because there is a sense in which those things are faking. Let me just pull it out. um the way that, yeah, a stubborn desire to seize, to snatch from life more than it could provide. Yeah, that's the way, like, those predatory women are. um and yeah, the ones that are the middle class are just more like, they want something more significant out of it. um
Right. But also his self-deception there is, I mean, you have a man coming up with a taxonomy of women.
oh,
Like,
come
I
on,
mean,
come on,
that's
don't give me all this gender and sexism stuff, like,
I think it's there. I mean, I don't walk around
yeah, well,
sodomizing.
no, I can, no, just like, he doesn't, like, yeah, he has this
By the
massage.
way, we're both coming from the perspective that he eventually reaches authenticity. We're basically talking about how he is in the first half. And
I
I would
would,
say that his self-deception is maybe greater than you're saying, I guess.
yeah, I mean, I guess I shouldn't make Gurov to be like, oh, he's a great guy or whatever, because he's got serious problems. The way that Chekhov presents the problems is somewhat sympathetic. Like, at least my impression is that way. Like, he's basically, when he's in Moscow, he's enmeshed in habit, and all of these little vices of, like, he's reading 3 newspapers a day but saying he's only one. He can't help but be allured by restaurants and the club, and having his vanity flattered when a famous writer has dinner with him, or whatever. And it's like
Right.
these are all the cheap little pleasures that make his life entertaining and meaningless. Turgenev in a different in I think actually it is in First Love. It's like anything to keep the child quiet. Anything just to keep that sort of hungry reptilian part of you fed. Um, but anyway, let me. But I just feel that with Gorov, it's like, yeah, he's a guy who's just he had some bad relationships when he was younger. He's very frustrated in his marriage, and he's come to some you know not very good conclusions. So like
Yeah.
I
Well, like I think that, like, yeah, I think that the taxonomy is a symptom of him just being complacent. Like it's like choosing ice cream flavors. He's thinking of people like choosing ice cream flavors, and he doesn't want to choose the one that he doesn't like. And then
well
that whole model is just shattered.
well yeah well it's actually not shattered that much, because there is actually, he recognizes there are good women when that are sincere and authentic and fresh, and that's where Anna
Chocolate ice cream.
stands in. He actually falls in love with this one. He didn't fall in love with the other authentic ones, but this one he actually does get that deep emotional investment.
Right. And we also have enough characterization of Anna where we know she's not something undesirable for him, which would be the Sartre retelling, would be that he has this whole thing blow up love affair with the monster that eventually consumes him. But he's like, yes, I leap into the void or something. That's like, I'm just kind of making shit up, but yeah. Yeah, okay, so let's get to the I think we've done a lot of good stuff with these two stories.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
um
but I just want to say, by the way, that,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
just as like a personal point, like I'm just like crying when I'm reading Lady with a Little Dog. Like it's just hits me so hard, that sense of, it's just in so few words, like he just conveys what it's like to really care about something, to really be in love, to feel that sort of fragile tenderness that's just, it's just desperate, just spurting out. um
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's I don't know how, again, I just don't know how someone can write this well. It's marvelous to me, and the same. And with Ionich, it's you get some of that, but it's more. I'm just more amazed at just how cutting it is. But anyway,
yeah. I mean, I think the quality is pretty. I mean, it's Chekhov, so I don't like. I think for me, what I like is this is like what's specifically um lovely. So I always point out formal moments that were good, because it's a for me like a piece of evidence where I go like, that was what caused my emotion. Because at the end of the day, it's not magic. I mean, it's magic obviously, but it's all material. It's all the causes for our joy at the literature are in the text that
yeah,
you can go, that's a moment. So I just always try to be as specific when I'm talking about, especially a short story. God, it's like, oh, that, oh. And um on a personal note, for me, leaving literature aside a little bit, Ionych resonated more with me because I don't know, I've always like thought one of the worst things that can happen to a person is they become like a stone creature, or they lose a sort of sense of self, or they become part of the riffraff, or they lose their. I do think that there is an aspect of getting older that I have seen a couple people solidify. Not in my life very much, but you do kind of see that solidification process. And Ionich is like the horror of that in a certain sense that connected to me. Whereas that is a horror that resonates with me personally because I am a stone creature now. You should have seen me when I was alive. Just kidding.
Oh yeah,
But that narrative resonates with me quite a bit. That
yeah,
idea of someone falling away from themselves in some way.
yeah. Gogol in Dead Souls has one particular character who's basically a hoarder, and is just extremely just obsessive and just greedy and miserly in all the worst ways. And it's like, but like something like I think the main character says something to him that just reminds him of his like childhood and as being a young man. And just for an instant, you see flicker, across the guy's eyes, this sense of like of being a human being again and having actual values, and then it disappears. And it's like seeing a drowning man suddenly emerge from the water and then be devoured again by the deep. Um,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah, that's always that type of archetype. I was going to go to archetype, but I just don't like that word. But that type of storyline basically is is always something I it resonates with. It kind of reminded me. So I had a friend who shall not be named, who very briefly became a 9/11 truther, which just
yeah, no,
as
yeah, you told me this. Yeah, go on, go on.
got out of it. He did amazing. Everything was great. Life goes on. But there is always a part of me that thinks back to that event because you saw a loss of like the guy fell into sort of idle chatter, right? Like he lost some reflectivity or something of himself and got caught up in this other scene, right? Like this totally other thing that had nothing to do with him in a certain
Well,
sense.
well, what you're talking about is like we talked about the other day is like of cult voice. Um,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
just
very much so.
it's like when you hear certain kinds of Christians talk about like have you heard the good news, you can be saved with the Lord Jesus or whatever, and there's just that you're not dealing with a person. It quite feels like you're dealing with this porcelain mask of a human being, who's just not actually like sharing with you information or things they've thought, but just sort of repeating and like using you as like, oh yeah, I'm going to convert you and I'm going to, help you help the cause or whatever. And it's like there's just this fakeness about
It's
interaction.
the difference between Christian rock and like rappers who happen to be Christian is you look at a rap song where it's like, oh, this person's struggling with their faith. Oh, they're having an experience. Whereas Christian rock is like, we're so happy, da, 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 da. And you're like, well, wait, this is ridiculous. This
Just
is
like
only
I
music
call
that
out to
can
my boy
function.
Jesus.
This is already this is only music that functions if you already believe in everything else that's going on. I
Yeah,
mean, there's so many lyrics, and it's like,
like that's what's so like for me I've read St. Augustine's Confessions and I've read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and I love the Confessions because you really get a sense of an intelligent, thoughtful human being struggling with these issues that are torturing him, with St. Augustine,
oh, totally, totally agree.
versus C.S. Lewis, who's just a prig. Like he just feels so fake, and he's not preachy, but he's so condescending. He's so self-satisfied, and he just flat out lies to you about stuff. Like he says, like, "Oh, I've been sort of lying about this one thing the whole time." And it's just like, well, that would have made your case a lot worse if you'd been honest about that from the very beginning. Um,
I remember it was so funny. It was it was some preacher on the radio who was like, none of the kids these days know the great philosophers of history. None of them know C.S. Lewis. And I was like, okay, that's, I was like, okay,
it's
it was just a weird
that is I mean, I
comment,
don't know how someone can auto satirize so hard. Like
But getting
that's
back to like,
beautiful. Like, oh, I follow the teachings of Fuckboy 99. Like what the fuck? Like that is it has that
but
same ring of like, what's wrong
in
with
the
you?
21st century, fuckboy 99 is actually like Giorgio Agamben messing around on Twitter or something, right? Like you're like,
No, but it's just
oh,
like somebody saying that. Like that's what it strikes me.
yeah.
I follow I know people don't understand great philosophers like C.S. Lewis. I follow the teachings of Fuckboy 99. I know what's up. You
Is
know,
in the
Christ.
discipline of poetry, there's poetry, and then there's what they call button poetry, which is like you open it, like Rupi Kaur is one of these writers, and it's like every day is so nice. Whoa, now I feel sad. It's because of my dad. Blah blah. It's just like it's like basically
Her,
like
let her. Uh,
rhymy, like whatever, and like affirmation oriented. Very like the sunshine shines on everyone equally, so give them a kiss or something. You're like, okay, you're
yeah,
wrong, and yeah,
I mean, like,
but it
you know,
has that ring of like people enter college and they're like, well, I love poetry, I love Rupi Kaur, and you want to figure out a way if they're young to steer them towards real
yeah,
writing.
yeah, it's very much like, visually speaking, the equivalent is Thomas Kincaid, um, who is just absolutely inextricable as a painter. Um, and it's like, okay, like there are.
Oh, oh my God, I forgot how funny. Sorry, I couldn't connect. I know I've seen this guy's stuff before, but it's so awesomely bad. I'm sorry. Just Thomas Kincaid is
You can
the
just flat
greatest
out you can
bad.
just flat out like share the screen if you want. Like let's do it. Let's fucking do it. We're trying to
Okay,
a takedown.
okay. I'm gonna share my screen. My desktop's terrible, so I'm gonna hide it. Yeah, I mean,
Oh my god, it's so painful. Oh, those purples. Oh my
so this is the type of stuff. Just because I don't know, I don't know, I have a pretty weird sense of humor. I would hang this in my house,
god.
but we wouldn't. I mean, it's horrible. Obviously, no one. It's just so wildly horrible, right? Like,
I mean,
oh, it's so great.
I've seen this sort of thing before where it's like, let's put everything from Disney in the same picture here, guys.
Okay, wait. We are totally off of our core mission.
this is no Kincaid.
Kincaid is part of.
This is the core of inauthenticity. This is spiritual death in an image. um, yeah,
Could
but
be, or
yeah,
he could be the happiest, most authentic guy in the world and just a crappy painter.
no, I look, I no, I've seen the guy talk, and he just he doesn't quite have a cult voice, but he just seems unpleasant.
Fair
Um,
enough. He wouldn't like the
now there are
darkness.
beautiful, happy painters out there who can actually, do something pleasant, like
Oh, of course.
Sorolla, but
Actually,
but
a lot of the abstract expressionist stuff I look at not with a furrowed brow, but a lot of times I look at with a joyful,
um,
ecstatic movement.
well, I mean, I too, I also find them like it's just fantastic and so sensually pleasurable, like engaging with the abstract expressionists, but they're really depressed, most of them. Um,
Yeah.
like I mean, I think it's just fun and delightful to look at Francis Bacon, but that doesn't mean Francis Bacon's good.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, no, you're right. I mean, like Rothko left his family to drink himself to death to finish painting. I don't necessarily think that. Yeah, you're right. Basically, you're right.
Yeah, yeah. You can do. I mean, and like music I listen to is like it's like, oh man, I'm the lyric. It's like, oh, I'm having a fun time. This is an upbeat song, and it's like, yeah, the guy's talking about cutting his wrists or whatever.
I'm
Um,
doing I'll send you I'm writing on my own a series of lectures on the philosophy of song, and there's a whole lecture on the dissonance between the meaning of the lyric and the meaning of the music, and how that tension is really uncomfortable the farther you try and focus on it, because it often can't be, you can't always reconcile it. But anyway, parting words. Can we talk like just 5 minutes on what art is trauma or art is traumatic, either way, means to you before we sign off for
yeah,
our first.
yeah. For me, what it means is, well, it's just this idea that so much of life is just habit. You're not, like you do the same things every day. You react you hear something on the news and you fit it into your standard beliefs. You run into a problem and you just have the standard solutions to that. Um, and you don't actually look at life and experience it immediately. You're not mindful, to use that particular term. And what art what art does is it cuts open that sort of dead film of habits of like, okay, now I'm actually living an experience. And I mean that's what happens with Ionich, of like he's living this sort of deadened life, where he's just like, yeah, like I just sort of, I read newspapers and I fuck women and I, have dinners with lawyers or whatever. Um,
Right.
and it's like, but then he actually has this thing that cuts his life open. And it's like, that's what you want from literature, is just like something that's going to be real, something that's going to be raw, something that, I mean, really sets you off guard. And to me, when I think of art, like the image in my head is almost like, it's like you're being kicked to death by an angry mob. Of you don't know the next kick, you don't know where it's going to happen, and it's going to be mean, and it's going to be brutal, and it's going to be the center of your universe, and the next kick happens, and it's even worse. And this
So
is the most
needless to
brutal thing
say,
to describe like the feelings you have when you look like Raphael. But
right.
I feel this is accurate. This is what Hugo
Needless
is
to
like.
say, yeah. But I was just going to interject. So needless to say, both of us are on the in very general terms, catharsis side of art instead of the Platonic ideals side of art.
No,
Like the art does that labor in you of purification is not the right word, but of jolting you in a weird way.
I mean, what you want from art is it really it strips you naked. Like you don't have this sort of like veneer of dignity and self-confidence and all these other things. It's like when you're really in the throes of art, you are screaming from fear, or you're ecstatic like a child, or you're just fucking sobbing, or something else, like, or you're so tranquil you didn't know that you could be at this kind of harmony with the universe. Like that's like one way. It's like you're engaged with life fully. There's no distance between you and the artwork. That's like a huge,
Yeah,
your
cool. Oh no, I like that. I like that. I'll do a quick answer on it and you can obviously respond, and then I think we should call it a day for the length of the podcast. So when I read the quote, poetry is the creation of a subject adopting a new order of symbolic relations to the world, I realized that that's actually a horrible quote for anyone who's never read Lacan.
I was thinking like,
Right, that was
let's
actually like
unpack here, Chris.
right. So I just wanted to like really quickly say basically when Lacan says the word symbolic, it can mean two things. Um, it can mean part of his ordering of subjectivity, which means stuff like roles. So, and also the domain of language. So like I'm a teacher, I'm a fireman, I'm a husband, all of that. So on one level, adopting a different symbolic position wouldn't be becoming a firefighter. It would be changing your stance on how firefighters are. You can't just move
Yeah.
around. It would be really changing your view on the position as a whole. But it also refers to the whole thing that makes you a subject. For Lacan, the symbolic order is everything. It's the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. It's everything that makes you you in the world. So, in what he's saying in poetry, poetry posits a subject that changes their position in regards to who they are, and that happens very clearly in Chekhov. I don't think actually Lacan's quote is going to apply to everything we read, but I think that is definitely what Chekhov is doing. Um, and that is traumatic because you are changing who. So if you're reading these things, you're following along with the subject, but if you're an empathetic reader, you're changing with the reader. You're learning and growing, or you're um come confronting yourself as you read great literature. And
Yeah,
that is parts of the trauma for
yeah.
me. I think.
Like for me, like it's sort of a touchstone novel for me. I think kind of this sense is Zola's Germinal, because for me, like beforehand, I mostly read more just romantic or these are light naturalistic literature before, where it's it's like characters they have goals and they're meaning to do things and all that sort of thing. Um, but when I read Zola, it's like, oh wow, this is what it's like to not have control over your life. This is what it's like to be run by habits. This is what it's like to have all of your desires frustrated and all of your purposes. It's not even that you see yourself being frustrated. It's like that's something that happens off screen, and then like weeks later, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I meant not to sell the wedding gift, but and I had a real intention, and then 4 weeks later, it's like, yeah, we sold that a couple weeks ago, whatever. Um, it's like it was just like, oh my god, this is a whole different way of being in the world. I don't want to be like this, but this is great to see it this way. And there's a certain truth to that. Certain, this is how life is sometimes, and this is how it is for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm on board with like, like this. Here's a whole different metaphysics for you. Here's a whole different way of being in the world. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
anyway, all right.
Love it.
All right. So, all right. So, all right. Well, that was great, Chris. So,
Thanks, Ray. By the way, your internet was amazing after
yeah. After that crash. Anyway, well, bye everybody.
bye.